fourth factor. The fourth factor is the market effect. So is this type of use going to harm the original market for the work? And the court said there's almost no chance that instead of reading your kid the bedtime story, Rich Who Stole Christmas, that you're going to go see the play as a substitute for that. This is not displacing the original market. As a side note for that, courts have been really, really clear that the other thing that could happen, that you can imagine a plaintiff might argue is, well, okay, it doesn't harm the market for the original work in that way, but I'm Dr. Seuss's estate, and all these parents might go see this play and decide this is a ridiculous book, and I'm not going to buy a copy for my kid. This parody has opened my eyes to how silly the original was. That doesn't matter. That is not the kind of market harm that courts care about. Our First Amendment rights are strong enough that we're allowed to engage in this kind of playful criticism and even allow people to change their mind about the quality of the original work. So that doesn't matter. Another really famous one is unauthorized, it's called an unauthorized parody of Gone with the Wind. So Margaret Mitchell's estate, or her publisher, sued an author who wrote another version of that book, again using tons from the original, including a bunch of direct quotes, the characters. The flip was that she told it from the point of view of a slave. And the court, again, for very similar reasons I just went through, said this is fair use. This is a commentary on the Gone with the Wind's rose-tinted portrayal of race relations and slavery in the South, and this is okay. I don't want you to leave you thinking that it's always okay to use somebody's book and create a new version of it, so I want to give you a cautionary tale. In the last decade, an author who called himself J.D. California wrote, again, an unauthorized sequel to The Catcher in the Rye called 60 Years Later. 60 Years Later, Coming Through the Rye, I think it was called. The difference in this case is that J.D. California, when he wrote this sequel, just wrote Holden Caulfield as the same disgruntled character he always was. He escapes from a retirement home, he goes and ventures around New York City, but he's still the same character. The author wasn't J.D. California, the author of the sequel, wasn't critiquing the original, he wasn't giving it any new meaning, he was just exploiting the original author's work by creating what in effect was within the author's rights to create their own sequel to the book. So I hope you can see the difference with those. So I've given you some fiction examples. Nonfiction I think is easier for people to grasp. Nonfiction is using materials in a way, often fair use applies when you're using a material in a way that is an example for, let me start over. There's a couple of ways that nonfiction authors can use materials, incorporate them in their work that are quintessentially fair use. One is to use copyrighted work to support your point. So you're doing news reporting, or you're writing a scholarly article, or whatever you're doing, but you're using the copyrighted works to support your point. You're saying, maybe you're doing a critical review of a book, and you need to put some quotes in there to say, this author excessively uses metaphors, and you're putting a few examples of that. This is quintessentially fair use, using material to support your argument or your point, or critiquing that material. I will direct you to this guide. Again, it's freely available on our website. You should have links if you're interested in learning more about fair use for nonfiction authors. There's a ton of these guides if you search for best practices in fair use. For different communities. So there's fair use for documentary filmmakers, there's fair use for poets. So if you have a particular genre that's not nonfiction, have a little search online or email me if you can't find them. The one I want to really emphasize here, because I see it a lot, just because you found something online doesn't mean it's not copyrighted. So we established up front that you get copyright automatically right now. So it doesn't mean you can just copy a photograph that you found online and put it in your blog. One thing to do, and you'll see all the pictures that I've included in your handouts, are Creative Commons licensed. So that's another reason to go back and think about Creative Commons licensing if you're interested in getting your work reused. And you can't just say, I just claim all ownership and then incorporate it into your work. That it's still, you have to go through a fair use analysis. You can't just use something just because you found it online or just because you just claim ownership. Okay, so I'm going to move on to our fourth and final topic, which is getting rights back. This is really important to our organization. It was one of our signature initiatives when we launched 4 years ago that we put a lot of resources and time into. We're really concerned, not only for authors, but for the public good, about works that just get tied up, protected by copyright, but not available to anyone, not available in the way the author wants, not in the hands of readers, not available for our historical and cultural record. And so getting rights back is one of the things that we care a lot about. In your packet, I'll just describe to you a chart that's in there. It's a chart by a scholar who did some research about availability of books on Amazon. Excuse my use of Amazon as a proxy, but I think it was for research purposes the best thing that the author could do. And it shows the availability of books before 1923 and by decade through recent times. And if you can see the graph, it shows that between 1923 and 1990, there's a huge drop in the availability of books. So if you remember, 1923 is a key date because those are the dates before which works first published in the United States are in the public domain. So those are quite available on Amazon, and you can imagine what's in there. It's all sorts, but it's also books like Shakespeare or Alice in Wonderland, books that are no longer protected by copyright that anybody can pick up and publish and make available and make sure that it's reaching readers. Between 1923, after 1923, the copyright ownership can be inconclusive, and so it's harder for people to engage in the works in those ways. The uptick comes after 1990. There's a reason for this. Most books have pretty short commercial lives, so the publishers are still marketing them, they're new enough, they're probably still selling copies, picking up readers. So what's happening? Why are these books between 1923 and roughly 1990, or even further, hard to get a hold of? The reason is that short commercial life. The author has potentially signed over all the copyright to the publisher. They can't do anything, or they perceive, I'm going to tell you some things you can do to regain control of those books. But the publisher has no incentive to make them available, and the author can't do it because the author handed over their rights. One thing you can do to prevent your works from falling into that gap is by making sound publication decisions. But the second is to think about getting your rights back if your work falls into that situation. So we created a guide for this as well. This was our first guide, the third guide I'm showing you. This is a guide to rights reversion. So it's actually very, very, very possible, particularly if your book is not selling well, to work with your publisher to get your rights back. You can either do that through a contractual clause. So if you kept your contract and you look it up, it might have what's called an out-of-print clause that says the conditions that trigger your ability to get your rights back. We've also found that authors that don't have their contracts or their contract didn't have a rights reversion clause have had a lot of success just talking to their publisher. You know, their publisher is not monetizing the book anymore. Have a reasonable, rational conversation with your publisher about getting your rights back. This guide goes into tons of detail about how to go about doing that. We also have sample letters that you can write to your publisher to get your rights back. One of the slides in the handout shows you a picture of a bunch of the authors that we've worked with or heard from who have used these techniques to get their books back. Some of them have made their books available once they got their rights back, freely available online, again under one of these Creative Commons licenses. Others think their work still has commercial value and have been successful in getting them republished. Maybe they put them out as an ebook in a way that it's never been available before, maybe a low-cost ebook, self-publishing it. We've heard tons of stories from authors who have done that, and one in particular stands out to me, which was it was actually an academic book, an introduction to fiber optics, and he made it available as a PDF download for $2.99. And the first person that bought it was a student in Botswana who said He was looking for an affordable introduction to fiber optics, and this was the first one he could afford. So good things can come of that. We've also just had authors who maybe they had 2 books published, maybe had a falling out or not good relationship with their publisher, got the rights to those 2 back, and were able to finish a trilogy and make those newly available. So there's all different things you can do to make your work available if you get the rights back. A lot of our authors tend to do it for the idea of preserving their intellectual legacy, to make sure that their works are actually just discoverable, even if they don't have a lot of commercial life left in them. There's one other way that you can get your rights back. So I've talked about rights reversion, which is either through your contract or through just negotiation with your publisher. The other way is a statutory right that cannot be contracted around. So Congress apparently once had some wisdom and decided that authors might not be the best bargainers, negotiators. They might not have all the information they need to make a successful bargain up front. So they gave authors the rights to give their works back after a certain amount of time. Initially, this was done for authors whose works were wildly successful so that they could renegotiate and get a bigger deal. So you see musicians doing this. It's most frequently used in the musical world where somebody has a big hit and after a certain amount of time they renegotiate that contract. Authors do it too. There's been some famous books that have gone through this because they're popular, but we're now seeing authors that are wanting to do this because their book is trapped in that trap where it's not available to anyone anymore. The trick with it, and the reason why we created these resources, is that the statutory language is nearly impossible to understand. This can happen 35, 40, 56, or 75 years from a triggering event, depending on the circumstances. That triggering event could be when the work was copyrighted, when it was published, when you signed the contract. So it's really difficult to figure out, which is why we've created a tool. If you're in this situation, at rightsback.org, you can answer a series of questions in an online tool and see if you're eligible for termination. The shorthand I can give you now is that if you have a book that was first published between 1980 and 1993, right now you're probably in the window where you can at least notify your publisher of the intent to terminate. So those of you with books published between 1980 and 93, come find me if you're interested in that, and I can tell you a bit more about that.